There is a thing my father told me once, standing in the gravel driveway of the house I grew up in, the summer I turned 19 and thought I had figured out most of what there was to know about the world. He said, "Son, the most dangerous man in any room is the one nobody's bothered to look at twice." I didn't understand what he meant then. I was 19. I was busy looking at myself. I understand now. My name is Thomas Aldridge. I am 64 years old. I drive a 2004 Ford F-150 that my daughter has been threatening to have towed for the better part of 2 years. It is dark green. Or it was dark green once. Now it's more of a suggestion of green, the kind of color that happens when a truck has spent 20 winters in Ohio and has stopped caring about your opinion of it. The passenger side door handle requires a specific technique, a lift-then-pull motion that takes most people 3 tries to figure out, and I have never once considered fixing it. I live in the same house I bought 34 years ago on Hartwell Road, a quiet street in Millbrook where the maple trees are enormous, and the neighbors still put their garbage cans out the night before because that is simply what you do. My neighbor across the street, a retired science teacher named Phil Garrett, once told me I was the most low-key man he had ever met in his life. I told him I was just ordinary. He shrugged and said, "Well, you're the most ordinary rich guy I've ever met." I told him I wasn't rich. He didn't believe me. We argued about it good-naturedly for about 4 minutes, and then his wife called him in for dinner, and that was that. Here is what Phil Garrett doesn't know. What the people at my church don't know. What the young man at the hardware store who helped me find the right sandpaper last spring didn't know when I thanked him and drove away in the green truck that has no business still being on the road. I own Aldridge Capital Holdings, real estate, agricultural land, a regional hospital network, 3 food distribution companies, and a portfolio of minority stakes in manufacturing firms across the Midwest that I have been quietly assembling since 1991. The whole structure is layered through holding companies and trusts that my attorneys built over decades specifically so that my name doesn't appear anywhere you'd look for it. No board profiles, no charity galas, no photographs in the business section of anything. I have attended exactly 2 industry conferences in the last 15 years, both times as an observer, both times in the same kind of clean, unremarkable clothes I wear to the grocery store. Aldridge Capital Holdings is worth somewhere north of $2.5 billion. I drive a truck with a passenger door that requires technique, and I have not once lost a night of sleep over that. Now, let me tell you about my daughter. Mara Aldridge Breck is 36 years old, and she is, without question, the best thing I have ever done in my life. She has a mother's eyes and a grandfather's stubbornness and a laugh that makes strangers in restaurants turn around and smile without knowing why. She became a physical therapist because she wanted to, not because I suggested it, not because it made financial sense, but because she said she wanted a job where she could watch people get better. I remember thinking when she told me that, sitting at the same kitchen table, that I had somehow managed to raise a human being who was measurably better than me, and that this was exactly what I had hoped for. 3 years ago, Mara brought home her husband. His name is Derek Breck. I want to be fair to Derek. I want to sit here and be measured and give the man the fullest benefit of every doubt available to him. So let me say this in the most generous terms I can manage. Derek Breck is the kind of man who has never once in his adult life questioned whether he is the most interesting person in a given room. He is 41, fit in the way of men who have gym memberships they actually use and want you to know it, handsome in a very deliberate way. He wears the kind of shoes that cost $400 and are designed to look like they didn't. He has opinions about wine that he shares without being asked. Within 20 minutes of meeting me for the first time, he had mentioned his MBA from Ohio State, told me about a consulting project he'd done in Austin, and used the phrase disrupting the space without apparent irony. I said, "That's something." I meant it as a complete sentence. He took it as encouragement. 2 years ago, Derek was hired as the Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Regional Health Partners, a mid-sized hospital management company based out of Columbus. Good organization, solid leadership at the top. 3 hospital campuses, about 800 employees, contracts with major insurance networks across 4 states. What Derek Breck did not know, what he has never known, what I have never seen any reason to tell him, is that Meridian Regional Health Partners is owned entirely by Aldridge Capital Holdings, which is owned by me. I had nothing to do with his hiring. That is the part I want to be clear about, because I'm an honest man and I have no interest in claiming credit for things I didn't do. Derek went through a standard recruiting process, a search firm out of Cincinnati, multiple interviews, a board review. He got the job because he's genuinely competent at the operational side of healthcare administration. I will give him that. Whatever else I'm going to say about Derek Breck in the course of this, I will not take away the fact that he's good at the mechanics of his work. What he's not good at is everything that surrounds the mechanics. It started the way these things always start, slowly. In small moments, you could almost talk yourself out of noticing if you were the type of man who talked himself out of noticing things. I am not that type. There was a Thanksgiving dinner, the first one after the wedding, where Derek spent 45 minutes explaining to my brother-in-law, a man who has been a machinist for 30 years, why guys like us had to be smart about money because nobody was going to hand us anything. My brother-in-law nodded politely. I refilled his coffee. There was the afternoon Derek stopped by the house unannounced and found me in the driveway changing the oil on the truck. He stood there in his good shoes watching me for a moment and then said, "Thomas, you know you could just take it to Jiffy Lube, right? It's like $40. I said, "I know, Derek." He shook his head slightly, the way people do when they feel secondhand embarrassment on your behalf, and went inside. There was the dinner party at their place. A few months after Derek started at Meridian, where he introduced me to a colleague of his, a woman who ran one of their partner clinics. And before I could say a word, Derek said, "This is Mara's dad. He's in between things right now. Retired, sort of." He laughed. She smiled politely. I said, "Nice to meet you." Then I got a drink from the bar and stood near the window and watched the room. I filed it away. That is what I do. I filed it away. The specific moment that moved everything from background observation to active attention happened on a Saturday morning in March. Mara had asked me to come over for brunch, something she does about once a month, one of those easy Saturday mornings where we sit in their kitchen and drink coffee and talk about nothing in particular. I like those mornings. I have always liked those mornings. I arrived a little early. Mara was upstairs. Derek was in the kitchen on a phone call, speaking at the volume people use when they're not paying attention to how their voice carries. I stood in the hallway for a moment, not hiding, just waiting to make myself known, and I heard my name. "Thomas." A pause. "Oh, he's fine." He's a sweet guy, honestly. Little lost, I think. Never really had a plan. You know the type. Mara worries about him. I just try to be patient. It's like having a retired golden retriever in the family. Friendly, no idea what's going on. There was a pause. Whoever was on the other end of the phone said something I couldn't hear. Derek laughed. "Yeah, exactly. Heart of gold. Zero ambition. But hey, that's family, right?" I stood in that hallway for 3 full seconds. Then I walked into the kitchen, helped myself to coffee and said, "Morning, Derek." He turned around. A very brief expression crossed his face. The fraction of a second look of the man wondering how long someone has been standing there. Then the recovery smile, warm, practiced. "Thomas. Hey, didn't hear you come in." "Door was open," I said. "We had brunch. I was pleasant. I helped clear the table. I drove home in the green truck. Retired golden retriever. No idea what's going on. I let that sit with me. I'm a patient man. I did not come by that patience easily. I spent the first 20 years of my working life being underestimated, and I learned the hard way that correcting people's assumptions too early is a waste of information. When someone underestimates you, they tell you everything. They lower their guard. They say the quiet part out loud. They hand you things they don't know they're handing you. So I waited. The invitation came 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening. Mara called, and she was warm and happy the way she always is when she thinks something good is about to happen. Derek's parents were hosting a dinner at their home in Upper Arlington, a nice part of Columbus, very nice. His father, Raymond Breck, was a recently retired regional director for a national commercial real estate firm. His mother, Sandra, was the kind of woman who volunteers for things but makes sure the right people know she volunteers. They wanted to have us all over for a proper family dinner, get everyone together, celebrate Derek's first full year at Meridian. "It'll be fun, Dad," Mara said. "They're really proud of Derek, and I think they're going to want to get to know you better." I'd like that, I said. I already knew several things about Raymond and Sandra Breck that would have made that sentence more complicated for Mara to finish, but this was not the time. 2 days before the dinner, Derek called me directly. This was unusual enough to pay attention to. He was casual, friendly, the particular friendliness of a man preparing to say something he knows might land badly. So, listen, Thomas, Saturday night. Raymond and Sandra, they're pretty traditional people, you know. They put a lot of stock in first impressions. I just want everyone to be comfortable, so. A pause. It's a nice dinner. Might be worth, I don't know, dressing a little sharp. Nothing crazy. Just, you know. I let the beat of silence sit there. Derek, I said, I appreciate you thinking of me. Of course, he said, audibly relieved. Just want the night to go well. So do I said. I'll see you Saturday. I hung up the phone. I sat in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the window above the sink, the one that faces the backyard where I have a vegetable garden that my neighbor Phil finds unreasonably impressive for a man who claims to be ordinary. Then I went to my bedroom closet. I moved past the suits in the back, the charcoal wool, the navy that I wore to the closing dinner when we finalized the hospital network acquisition in 2019, the dark grey I wore to my wife's funeral and have not touched since because some clothes belong to specific days and no other. I moved past all of it. I took out a clean pair of khaki trousers, a simple plaid button-down, my everyday shoes, brown leather, good quality, not new. I laid them on the bed. Then I went outside and stood next to the green truck in the driveway for a moment. We have a dinner, I said to no one in particular. The truck said nothing, which is exactly what I needed. Saturday arrived like all important days arrive without any sign that it knows what it is. I was up at 5:30, coffee black, sitting at the kitchen table by the window. The backyard was starting to come in from the cold. The first green things pushing up through the garden beds, and I sat there looking at it and felt something I can only describe as very quiet. I dressed carefully in exactly the clothes I'd laid out. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment and thought, yes, that is exactly right. I drove to Upper Arlington. The brick house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac on a street where every house was large and every lawn was maintained with the kind of perfection that communicates intentionality. The house itself was brick, 2 stories, a 3-car garage, landscaping that had clearly been done by professionals and recently. The kind of home that is beautiful in a way that requires maintenance to remain beautiful, which is a very specific thing to build your identity around. I parked the truck at the curb. I noticed the small pause a young man near the front walkway made when he saw what I was driving. He was not quite a valet, but he had the posture of the person whose job involved evaluating arrivals, and I could see him making a quiet adjustment to his expectations. Raymond Breck answered the door before I had finished climbing the front steps. He was 68, silver-haired, broad across the shoulders. The kind of man who had probably been very physically impressive at 40 and was still trading on that. His smile was ready, deployed with the precision of someone who had spent decades in rooms where first impressions were currency. "Thomas," he said, hand extended. "So glad you could make it. Come on in." His handshake was firm and timed. I noticed he glanced, just briefly, just once, at my shirt before meeting my eyes. He had decided something. I could see it in the slight adjustment of his smile. Not colder, not warmer, simply recalibrated. Sandra Breck appeared from the dining room with her arms slightly extended, the greeting of a woman who communicates warmth through choreography. She was dressed in the particular way of women who want to appear casually elegant, which requires far more effort than appearing formally elegant. "Thomas," she said, taking my hands in both of hers, "we have heard so many wonderful things. Mara speaks about you constantly. You must be so proud of her." Not, "Mara speaks so highly of you." The subject of the sentence was Mara. I was the audience. "Every single day," I said, and meant it. Mara crossed the room and put her arms around me. I held on for a moment longer than the occasion required. "You look good, Dad," she said quietly. "So do you, sweetheart," I said. Derek materialized behind her. He looked at my outfit for roughly half a second with an expression that came and went like a cloud crossing the sun. Then the practice warmth. Thomas. Good to see you. Come on in, Dad. Just opened a bottle he's been saving. Something saved. Naturally, the dining room was everything the outside of the house had promised. The table was set with the kind of deliberate formality that is designed to establish hierarchy through objects, crystal, heavy silverware, cloth napkins folded into shapes. A centerpiece that probably took an hour to arrange. The room communicated a single idea with great consistency. We have always lived this way. I sat down. I unfolded my napkin. I looked at the people around the table and I became exactly what they expected me to be. A pleasant, soft-spoken, slightly vague older man with no particular story. The retired golden retriever, friendly, no idea what's going on. I am very good at this. I've had 64 years of practice. Raymond led the conversation the way men like Raymond lead conversations. From the center of the table, with the certainty of someone who has never been told he was speaking too long, he talked about commercial real estate, about the difficulty of finding good people, about what he described as the lost art of professional ambition. He talked about Derek's extraordinary year at Meridian, the operational improvements, the margin recovery, the way the board had responded to his leadership. The boy understands systems, Raymond said, with the satisfaction of a man describing a successful investment. He sees how the pieces fit. That's rare. I nodded. I said, "You must be very proud." Sandra turned to me at one point with a smile that had a specific texture to it. "Thomas, what was it you did before you retired?" "Derek mentioned you were in business at some point." "At some point?" I let that sit for half a second. "Various things," I said pleasantly. "Real estate mostly. Some other investments along the way." "Oh, how nice," she said, with the tone of someone filing a response under not particularly relevant. Then she turned back to Raymond, who was talking about the golf trip they were planning. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip, because the envelope hadn't arrived yet. It arrived with dessert. I had been at that table for 2 hours, 2 hours of being the warm, quiet, slightly forgettable presence in the corner of the room, while the actual business of the evening was conducted around me. I had played the role without a single missed step, and not one person at that table had given a second thought to the man in the plaid shirt with the interesting truck. Raymond reached beside his chair and placed a manila folder on the table with the deliberate ease of a man who has rehearsed a moment. He smoothed it once. He slid it toward me. "Thomas," he said, his voice dropping into a lower, more considered register. "There's an opportunity we'd like to talk to you about, as family." I looked at the folder. I did not reach for it. Sandra's hands were folded. Derek had straightened in his chair. Mara glanced at me with an expression I know the way. I know my own handwriting. Something she hadn't expected was happening. "Derek has been approached by a private equity group," Raymond said. "They're looking at healthcare consolidation in the Midwest. He has a real opportunity to come in as a founding partner. Ground floor. The kind of thing that doesn't come twice." "That sounds significant," I said. "It is," Raymond said. "What they need is an initial capital commitment from Derek's side, and what we're proposing," he nodded toward the folder, "is a bridge arrangement, a structured loan, using assets from your estate as collateral. Temporary, fully documented, you'd be in a protected position." I looked at the folder for a moment. Sandra smiled. "We know this is a big ask, Thomas, but family takes care of family. And with Derek's trajectory, Raymond," I said pleasantly, "could I take a moment to look this over?" "Of course," he said, settling back with the relief of a man who has reached the stage of the conversation he has been working toward. I opened the folder. I read every page. Slowly, the way I read every document, from the first line to the last. The table was quiet. Someone's fork made a small sound against a plate. A car passed outside. I turned pages and read. The proposal was for $250,000 in collateral from what Raymond's documents described with touching confidence as Thomas Aldridge's estate assets. Based on, as far as I could determine, the assumption that a man who had worked in real estate and various things for decades must have accumulated something worth drawing on. They had no idea what I was worth. They were guessing. They had guessed conservatively and structured around that guess. I closed the folder. I picked up my water glass. I looked at Raymond Breck with the warmest smile in my collection. "I appreciate the thought that went into this," I said. "Let me take it home and give it the attention it deserves." Raymond exhaled. Derek's shoulders came down approximately a quarter inch. Sandra reached for her wine. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. I complimented the dessert. I shook Raymond's hand at the door, a full handshake, my eyes holding his for exactly 1 second longer than he expected. He didn't know what that second meant. I got in the truck. The engine turned over with its familiar complaint. The heat came on immediately for once, which I took as a good sign. I drove home through the dark Ohio streets, and I was, by any observable measure, a completely ordinary man at the end of a pleasant evening. I said nothing for 12 days. Not a word, not a response, not a ripple. I went to church on Sunday. I had coffee with Phil on Wednesday. I worked in the garden. I drove the truck to the hardware store. On day 5, Derek sent me a text. "Hey Thomas, hope you had a chance to look at the proposal. Exciting opportunity, right?" I waited 4 hours and typed, "Still reviewing. These things take time." He sent a thumbs up. I set my phone down and made a phone call. Not to Derek, not to Raymond, to the 2 senior members of the Meridian Regional Health Partners Board. Men who had been in the room when I structured the acquisition in 2017. Men who understood that when my actual voice came through on their phones, it was not a social call. "I need a full compliance review on our Columbus COO," I said. "Scope it broadly. Any external business development, any conflicts of interest, any use of Meridian's network or resources outside his scope of employment. Start Monday." Then I went inside and made dinner, because here is what I knew that Derek Breck did not know. What Raymond and Sandra Breck were sitting in their brick house in Upper Arlington not knowing. I had written Derek's employment contract. Every clause, every term. Not personally. My attorneys did the drafting, but the framework came from me. The same framework I have used across every company in the Aldridge portfolio for 20 years, including a fiduciary duty provision and a non-compete structure covering any business development activity that touched Meridian's market, Meridian's clients, or Meridian's partner network, including whatever private equity conversation Derek Breck had been having for God knows how long. The review came back in 9 days. I sat with the results for 2 days before I did anything because I am not a man who acts on incomplete certainty. Derek had been in conversations with the private equity group for 7 months. 7 months of preliminary meetings, concept documents, partnership discussions, all conducted using his Meridian title, his Meridian relationships, and in at least 3 documented instances, his Meridian-provided contact database. He had been building his exit while running the company I owned, using the platform I provided to construct something that would directly compete with my portfolio's healthcare holdings. He had done all of this while looking at me across dinner tables and deciding I was the retired golden retriever. I put on the charcoal suit on a Thursday morning, the one from the back of the closet. I pressed it the night before. I wore a tie. I drove the green truck to Meridian Regional Health Partners Columbus headquarters, and I parked in the space near the entrance that has a small placard that says, "Aldridge Capital, Reserved." The one Derek Breck had walked past 200 times without once asking whose name that was. I walked into the conference room on the executive floor. I sat at the head of the table. Board members to my left. Legal team to my right. The compliance report in a folder in front of me. Derek walked in 4 minutes later expecting a routine check-in. He was carrying himself the way he always carries himself. Easy, fitted to his own confidence. He scanned the room. He took in the board members, the attorneys, the documents laid out in front of people. He took in the reserved parking sign visible through the window. Then his eyes found me, and I watched it happen. Not quickly. Slowly, the way understanding sometimes has to move when the distance between what a person believed and what is actually true is very large. His eyes went from my face to the board members, to the legal team, to the folder in front of me, to the placard through the window, and then back to my face, and somewhere in the middle of that circuit, the expression he had walked in with simply left him. The silence lasted about 8 seconds. I let every one of them sit there and do their work. Then I said, "Sit down, Derek." He sat. "I'm going to say this clearly," I said, "and I'm only going to say it once. Not because I'm angry. I'm not angry. I want you to hear that. Anger is for situations that surprise me, and this situation did not surprise me." I opened the folder. Meridian Regional Health Partners is owned by Aldridge Capital Holdings. Aldridge Capital Holdings is owned by me. Has been since 2017. The company you've run for the past year. The salary you've earned. The industry reputation you've built your current identity around. These exist within a structure that I built before you ever sent in your application. I didn't hire you. I had nothing to do with that, but I did write the employment framework that governs your position here, every word of it. I turned to the relevant page, including the fiduciary duty and non-compete provisions that cover everything documented in this report. 7 months of parallel business development using Meridian's resources, relationships, and your position here as a founding credential. All of it a material breach. All of it documented. Derek's jaw was set. He was working very hard at something. I could see it. He was trying to find the posture, the version of himself that could sit at this table and not disappear. "Our legal team is prepared to move forward on this fully," I said. "Or..." I closed the folder. "You resign today, cleanly, professionally. Your reputation stays intact. This stays in this room. You get to walk out of here with your record clean, and whatever you build next, you build it honestly, from scratch, without using anything that belongs to someone else." Raymond and Sandra Breck were not in that room, but they had structured their proposal on the assumption that a certain amount of money existed in a certain place that they could access through me. I had moved it. The morning after I got home from their dinner, I called my attorneys. We'd completed the irrevocable transfer of Mara's inheritance portion, directly into an account in her name, a personal trust that requires only her signature, fully separated from any structure that Raymond Breck's very well-drafted but ultimately fictional proposal could have touched. By the time Derek got around to sending that thumbs-up text, the assets his father had mapped out in that manila folder no longer existed where Raymond thought they did. I told Derek that as I stood up and buttoned my jacket, the proposal your father brought to dinner was built around assets that have since been transferred directly to Mara, irrevocably, in her name only. Whatever conversation you want to have with your parents about that, that is your conversation to have. Tell them the lamb was good. It was. Derek resigns that afternoon. 2 sentences, brief, professional, effective immediately. I drove home. The truck groaned at the first light on Broad Street and then settled into its rhythm. The sun was still up, catching the hood in that particular late afternoon way that makes even an old green truck look like it has some dignity left. I turned onto Hartwell Road and pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off. 34 years of being the man nobody measured twice, and knowing the whole time exactly what I was carrying. I went inside and I called my daughter. Mara arrived 40 minutes later. I had 2 cups of tea on the kitchen table, the good cups, the ones her mother bought at the shop in Vermont the summer before she got sick, the ones I use on days that matter. She sat down across from me. She looked at my face the way she's been looking at my face since she was small, reading it, searching it, the way children learn to read the faces of parents who don't always say the full thing directly. I told her everything, from the beginning, the structure of the companies, the acquisition, the contract clause, the March Saturday when I stood in her hallway and heard Derek on the phone, the dinner in Upper Arlington, the folder, the 12 days, the compliance review, the boardroom, the transfer of her inheritance to her own name that same morning. I told her about the parking placard Derek had walked past 200 times. I told her about the parking placard Derek had walked past 200 times. I told her about the charcoal suit. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time, long enough that the tea cooled and neither of us touched it. Then she looked up at me and said, "Dad, how long have you been carrying all of this?" I looked at her mother's eyes in her face, at the person she chose to become entirely on her own, at the 36-year-old woman sitting in my kitchen who had, in her own right and without any help from me, built a life that I was proud of in ways that had nothing to do with money. "Long time," I said. "Why didn't you tell me? About any of it. The companies, the all of it. Why? I looked down at the tea. I looked out the window at the garden, the rose coming in slowly in the April cold. I looked back at my daughter, because I wanted you to become who you are, I said, and not who everyone would have tried to make you be if they'd known. I didn't want you growing up in the shadow of a number. I wanted you to live in the actual light. She was quiet again. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and I let her. And we sat like that for a while in the kitchen on Hartwell Road while the evening came down over the maple trees outside and Phil Garrett's porch light came on across the street. I thought about Raymond Breck sitting very still in the Upper Arlington house, Sandra setting down her glass. I thought about Derek finding the words to explain a manila folder full of assumptions about a man he had decided, over many dinners and one Saturday morning phone call, did not require his full attention. I thought about all of that and then I let it go, because the only thing in this kitchen that mattered to me was sitting right there across the table with her hands around a cup of tea that had gone cold, looking at me like I was still just her father, which is the only thing I've ever actually wanted to be. Some men spend their whole lives trying to look like what they are. I spent mine making sure that the only people who knew exactly what I was were the ones who had earned the right to know. The rest of them find out when they need to find out, and the ones who put a folder on a dinner table and slide it across to the wrong man always find out at exactly the right time. If this story spoke to you, hit that like button and subscribe to Dad's Pure Revenge. There are more stories coming, and every single one of them is worth your time. I'll see you in the next one. I'd been thinking a lot about that folder since it all happened. The way Raymond smoothed it once with his palm before he slid it across the table. The practiced confidence of that gesture. The certainty that the man sitting across from him in the plaid shirt and unremarkable shoes was exactly what he appeared to be. Manageable, grateful, easy to move. That is the thing about how we treat people we've decided don't matter. We stop being careful. We stop thinking about what they might know, what they might be watching, what they might be quietly filing away. We get comfortable with our assumptions, and comfort is where people make their real mistakes. Derek called me a retired golden retriever. He said it on a Saturday morning in his own kitchen, on a phone he didn't know I could hear, and I don't think he spent a single minute afterward wondering if it would ever matter. That is what underestimating someone actually looks like up close. It's not dramatic. It's not cruel in a big, obvious way. It's just the slow, easy carelessness of a man who has already made up his mind and stopped paying attention. What I want people to understand, if they take anything from what I've shared here, is that the consequences of how we treat people are not immediate. They rarely are. They accumulate. Every small dismissal, every half-second expression you don't bother to hide, every conversation you have at the volume of someone who doesn't think the other person counts, those things don't disappear. They get filed by people with much longer memories than you're accounting for. I didn't engineer what happened in that boardroom as revenge. I want to be honest about that. I did what I did because Derek had used something that didn't belong to him, had built something deceptive inside a structure I was responsible for, and I had an obligation to address it. The outcome he experienced was not punishment I designed for him. It was simply the natural weight of his own choices arriving on schedule. That is how it actually works. Not as philosophy, not as something you read on a wall somewhere, but as a practical mechanical fact of how decisions move through time. Derek made choices for 7 months that he believed had no ceiling, because he believed nobody above him was watching. He was wrong about that in the most specific possible way, but the wrongness was always going to find him eventually, regardless of who I was. The choices themselves were the problem. What I did deliberately, the part that was actually a choice on my part, was protect Mara. I transferred her inheritance the morning after that dinner, not a strategy, not as a move in some longer game, because she is my daughter, and it was hers, and I was not going to let someone else's calculations touch what belongs to her. The intelligence it takes to build something real, the kind that lasts, is not the intelligence of the room where you perform it. It's the intelligence of the years before anyone's watching. Derek understood systems. Raymond told me that at dinner, and Raymond was right. But understanding systems and understanding people are different things, and Derek never quite got around to the second one. I am 64 years old. I drive a truck that requires technique to open from the passenger side. I'm going to keep driving it, not because I'm making a point to anyone, but because it runs, and I know every sound it makes, and there is something about a thing that has been with you through everything that you do not trade for something newer, simply because you can. Some men spend their lives performing what they are. I spent mine actually being it. There is a difference. The people who matter always figure out which one you are.